Let's go to the next step and look how do children use media in this time of the lockdown. As you know, we have done a study in 42 countries with over 4,000 children, and we have asked them, among others, to choose 3 media which they use more at the moment. And you see we have a whole range of things. And what we clearly can see is TV is the winner in these times. There are some countries where TV is mentioned by most of the kids. On the first point, we have countries where it's mobile phone, for example, in Germany or Brazil, YouTube on rank 1, or WhatsApp. We also have computer in Italy and video game in Canada, but it's also big in the States, and tablet in Belgium. So Daphna Lemisch will tell us how do children use media and what are the functions media have and how do they control all this media usage?
So hi Maya and hi everybody. So we already heard a lot from my great other colleagues that media serve all kinds of functions for children during a crisis. And we know it from previous research as well. You know, we studied it during the Iraq War. We studied during a natural disaster like the tsunami in Japan. And we found out that the functions are for information, for entertainment, for emotional regulations, and for social connectivity. But we wanted to hear that from the children themselves. So we asked them questions about this. And let's look at the first slide, please, and see what did they say. So what we find out that children during the pandemic said that they were using media more when they were bored, to connect with friends, for school, to find what's going on, to search for information, but also when they're lonely, when they're sad, when they're scared. So it's both information and emotion and social functions. We then looked more deeply into one of the questions as an example of what are they using information, how much more they're using media for information about what's going on. And if we look at the slide right now, you can see that 70% of children say they're using media for information more right now. And not surprisingly, it goes up in age. So you can see the young ones only 59%, which is still quite a bit. And it goes all the way up to over 70%. And the other interesting thing is that there's no difference between boys and girls. So both boys and girls, all children, are interested in information about what's going on, which reinforces what we heard before. Also important to say that children often argue that the news indeed do scare them, the adult news. Some say that they just prefer not to pay attention to it anymore, to stay away from it. So again, it reinforces the need of producers to create content that is age appropriate, that is informative and not overwhelming. The other thing that we already saw was the importance of screens. Maya mentioned television as the #1 screen that children are watching. Netflix, YouTube, their phone screens. So that has become the main way for them to handle their emotions and to handle issues that have to do with loneliness and sadness, etc. We also found out that computer games and video games more specifically serve a very important role in calming children, but more so for boys and girls, and that issue will be returned to later on in the presentation. So now the question is, so how are children managing to control all those many hours that they're spending with media during the pandemic? So let's look at the next slide of how they're controlling the competencies. So we have another slide. I'm looking for the other slide, but okay. Basically, they were saying, here comes the slide, that they were using all kinds of strategies, like following a schedule, avoiding news that are scary, having a timer to limit their time with the media. They browse student news and websites for information. They put the phone, upside down so they don't see messages coming in. This is a tactic that we all use. My phone is upside down right now, so I won't be distracted, etc. So they develop all kinds of strategies to manage their media. So what all this means for producers, I'm reinforcing messages we already heard. That first, children need age-appropriate information that informs them and does not scare them. And second, that given that screens have such a main source of emotional regulations, that we have to make sure we're providing them with valuable content that supports a positive state of mind and that strengthens the resilience in the face of adversity and challenges. And the other very important function is, of course, the social connectivity. And for that, we're going to turn now to my colleague, Professor Thomas Lundtoft, to talk about that topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daphna. And so I'm going to speak a bit about how Danish children went about staying in touch with their friends via digital technologies during lockdown. And my basis for speaking to this issue, apart from the survey that is being presented here today, is another survey that was scrambled together rather quickly in the early weeks of lockdown in Denmark. To be precise, the survey was undertaken in week 13, which is from March 23rd until the 29th, and 328 Danish children answered to this survey or were spoken for. And the general picture in regard to friendships divides children by age, really. Young children were not only much less in touch with friends via digital media, they were also less in touch with friends altogether. So school children and teenagers were, not surprisingly, engaged in daily schoolwork that put them in touch with classmates. And in addition to this, they have been using technologies they were already used to. This includes Snapchat and FaceTime, which were most commonly used, but also computer games, which were used to a greater extent by males. In return, females were using text messages, image messages, and video calls to a greater extent than males. So in conclusion, Danish children have a lot of ways, digital and non-digital, for keeping in touch with friends. But the younger children were doing so to a much lesser extent. And this points to a need for coming up with ways of enabling young children to stay in touch with their friends in this type of situation. And yeah.
One question is, why do Danish children have so less fear? And they're not perceiving their parents as fear. Why they are so relaxed?
Well, I suppose we can only form hypotheses on this topic, but we've already been talking about public service broadcasting, and I do think that that plays a significant role. There's been a lot of information directed towards children. The Prime Minister has given interviews directed towards children, but also the permeation in Denmark of IT equipment is very high. A lot of parents are used to working from home, so perhaps the situation wasn't too difficult to adjust to. And finally, Denmark hasn't been hit quite as hard as other countries in terms of people being hospitalized and the death toll and so on.
Thank you. A very important insight, and makes clear there are ways how we can support children and how we can help them, especially with media. And this is the point where I give over to Kirsten. Give us some more examples of the Special Achievement Prize.
Okay, I would like to give you an example from Mexico, a country, Spanish-speaking country, but with many indigenous people. And these communities don't speak Spanish, so information on Corona does not necessarily reach them. And here is an example from an NGO, Vientos Culturales, and they are producing information pieces for young people, and they are translating these pieces into more than 30 indigenous languages. So I would like to show you a clip. Let's see it.
Sin embargo, al inicio de la pandemia había poca información en las comunidades indígenas en lengua originaria de lo que estaba sucediendo, lo cual generó incertidumbre, a la vez que una gran cantidad de nuestros pueblos no cuentan con servicios de salud. Debido a lo anterior, durante la emergencia sanitaria por el COVID-19, muchas comunidades decidieron cerrar por completo el acceso a personas de otros lugares. Para dar respuesta a esa necesidad informativa, en Vientos realizamos videos que se tradujeron a 30 lenguas orgullosamente mexicanas.
Con o achten ok nati achten, kwan hanek o panjamachten.
What to menki atzen kabahe, he lubeita luseb kimi le virus obo.
Many broadcasters have done a big effort in filling the gap of children knowing what to do during this long time staying at home. And so we have some example like this one from the Dutch broadcaster NTR, and they did a Klokhuis masterclass showing kids, for example, learning new skills. How can you do breakdance?
Oké, als eerst de toprok. Je springt naar achter en klapt in je handen. Dan gaat dit been naar voren, terwijl je armen naar achter gaan. Je springt weer, klap, en dan gaat je andere been. Dat doe je 4 keer, met z'n allen. 5, 6, daar gaan we. Klap, 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 klap. Stop. Als laatste zet je dit been terug, kruis je je benen en gaan we naar beneden voor het footwork.
And other broadcasters did the same, like, for example, the long-running German show with the mouse. And on different platforms, they provided plenty of information and support to children, how to spend their time. For example, how to do hobbies. They created a hobby room on their website, and children could find examples for doing experiments, for creating art, or for unconventional exercise tips. And also the BBC, How to Be Epic at Home, offered great inspiration to create art at home. And there are many more examples which we also going to be showing on the PJI website.
Thank you. Well, one thing we should keep in mind is most of the time, and especially in our survey, we are talking about children in the middle class or a little bit upper middle class. But as we have seen, more important is the question, what does it mean to be poor under these circumstances? So let's go to some countries and some researchers where they really found out something about it. First one would be from the US. And Jennifer Kotler from Google has done a special study on the question, what do children in economic not so wealthy households do with this crisis? Jennifer, can you hear me? Yes. Go on with your presentation.
Okay, great. What we did in the U.S. is that we realized that that low-income families across the whole globe, but are facing challenges that are really exacerbated by the pandemic. So it's not only illness, but the financial implications of COVID also are felt in a very big way. And of course, this is true all over the globe, but we focused on the United States, and we felt that it was important to supplement the larger sample from the US to really focus on households that where children were from families earning under $50,000 a year. And so we had about 510 children who came from a Touchstone Research Online panel, and they were recruited so that we had about half boys, half girls. We focused on 11 to 13-year-olds, and we made sure that we had a robust sample of Hispanic American children, White American, Black American, and Asian American children as well. We had fewer Asian American children, but we had about 50 Asian American children, and the majority said that they took the survey without any help, but some did get a little bit of assistance from their parents. So the one thing I want to just focus on is how worried the children were in the United States who come from low-income families. So in the larger sample, you saw that the United States was one of the countries where there was kind of low worry. But among this particular sample of children whose families earned $50,000 or more, you see that 31% are very much worried. That's given it the 6. And if you combine the 5 and 6, that's over half who are very worried. You see that it is almost twice as much who are very much worried if you're a child of color, whereas the white children only 18%. But overall, the 31% would have put the United States in the red zone of worry. But if you focus on children that come from families of means, you're maybe not going to catch that. And then the children worried about their parents more than they worried about themselves. And children of color worried more about themselves and their families than white children worried about themselves and their families. It was closer when it came to being worried about their families than compared to themselves, but it's still the children of color were more likely to be worried for themselves and for parents. And almost half of the children said their parents are very worried. And Asian American children reported that their parents were more worried than other children reported that their parents were worried. Now, over a little less than half of the children said they had a household member still working outside the home. Now, looking at higher income families, they're likely to be having everybody work at home unless they're potentially a doctor or a first responder. But Hispanic American families were much more likely than other groups to have a household member working outside the home as well. And then if you look at sort of worry related to whether a household member was working inside or out the house, you see that for the most part, Asian children were reporting more worry when household member was working outside of the home. And it's the reverse for the Hispanic children. So one of the things that's interesting is looking at why that might be. And given that the anti-Asian sentiment is high among some groups in the United States, given that the coronavirus originated in China, perhaps that's what we're seeing here. And I think that's incredibly important to understand some more. But what's interesting is when asked to state in their own words how they manage their stress, words such as play, game, watch, video were high on everyone's statements. And you see that the word play is coming up really strong. And I think that's a really important sign for people who are creating interactive games for children to make sure that the games that we're creating are strong and helpful. And also that if we're modeling play on television, that we are creating content that actually resonates with all children. And so there is a lot of worry about the coronavirus among low children in this sample in the United States. So it doesn't necessarily reflect all of the United States. And I think it's very important for all countries to focus on subgroups within each country. And children may be experiencing the pandemic based on race and ethnicity. And we really need to understand that based on, in terms of different rate of infections and racism, as well as the economic implications. And so we really should consider race, class, and the circumstances in developing media and technology solutions for our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really important insights and good to know, especially for the States. Our next speaker has taken a look at Sub-Sahara. So we are at the African continent. And Dina, can you hear me?
Yes, greetings, and thank you for including me in this presentation. I'm here to represent through data and my professional experiences the voices of vulnerable children living in sub-Saharan Africa. Of the close to 8 billion people who live in the world, a new classification schema created by the late Hans Rosling indicates that 4/7 of the world live at level 1 or 2. His 2018 book, Factfulness, presents the precarious world of those living on less than US $8 a day. This group is on the edge. An illness, weather, or political event may plunge a family into abject poverty. But similarly, good crops or more education can mean precious stability. Many sub-Saharan children live on this edge. Schooling and educational media can make a huge difference, leading to awareness of viable opportunities. But are these children getting the education they need? Even before the COVID-19 crisis, there was a cause for concern. In government schools, on average, the teacher-to-student ratio is 1 to 53. One teacher for over 50 children. Books are rare, teachers are poorly trained, corporal punishment, while not sanctioned, is often used. If ever there was a case to be made for educational media, this is it. This diagram, adapted from the CTW model, reminds us in creating exceptional programming, one must focus on the intersection of media, content, and audience. Starting with media in sub-Saharan Africa, one should consider communicating through either traditional broadcast or mobile phone. Internet capabilities and applications are available only for the children in the top 5%, but I would urge you to produce for the rest of the population. More than 80% of the African continent has some access to electricity. Yes, It is unstable and there are often power outages, but for those at level 2, it is common for there to be household or community access to television. Additionally, even at level 2, most have mobile phones. Phone use is limited by the number of household members sharing that phone, network reception, battery life, and prepaid credit. However, parents can receive SMS messages offering educational and healthy messages for the family. On content, while they enjoy Tom and Jerry like others around the globe in previous generations, African children are hungry for educational content. Consider the rise in popularity of Ubongo programming. Ubongo, based in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, produces 2 animated educational programs, Ubongo Kids and Akili and Me. Ubongo Kids is in 33 countries and has 10.4 million viewers. Akili and Me, which targets pre-primary school children, is in 9 countries with 12 million viewers and 2.5 million listeners. A widespread concern observed in the recent study among the sub-Saharan children was how COVID-19 would affect schooling. In Tanzania, 81% of the surveyed 9 to 13-year-olds were very concerned about missing classes and school content. It is a realistic worry, as school interruptions might very well mean the end of one's education. There is a strong desire among children and their parents for programming featuring age and culturally appropriate content, edutaining children on science, literature, and geography. On audience, I would strongly advocate for programming that meets the needs of not just the child, but also his or her caregiver. Think about the preschool child being cared for by a mother whose education never went beyond primary school, or more likely, since mom is working, the child is watched by a caring but illiterate housegirl. My charge to you is to create programming that reaches the child and the caregiver. Clever programming serves as the one stone to reach the population eager to move from level 2 to level 3 or 4. Thank you.
Thank you so much. An important insight. And we go on to Ecuador. And Monica, one of our very beloved Prishness friends. Monica, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, Maya. Ecuador has been very badly impacted by COVID-19. This country has a population of 17.5 million and a poverty rate in the urban area of 17.2 and in the rural area of 41.8. The lockdown started on the 17th of March, and children have been out of school since then. The biggest fear of the children in Ecuador are that their parents can die or get sick, that they can lose their job, therefore have no resources for food and goods. A lot of Ecuadorians in poor circumstances have to go out to work every day because what they make that day feeds them that day. So they have to go out and they can't stay at home, so children fear that a lot. Less than 27% of Ecuadorian children have access to a computer. 60% don't have internet. 85% do have a cell phone. So teachers can only reach them through phone, through WhatsApp messages. And that's the only way they can get in contact. On the other hand, television reaches 93% of the country. So that's the channel to get in contact with children in Ecuador. In this emergency, special programming has been produced to reach children at their homes. Even though we give classes on that programming and a lot of emotional contention, healthy habits, and some learning, they feel that right now, 73% consider their learning less than before. The lockdown in Ecuador can result in growing poverty, school dropout, domestic violence, teenage pregnancy, child labor. Returning to school will be difficult. There's a large percentage of schools that don't have sinks to wash their hands, or at least not enough toilets, and sanitary is very needed to go back to school. So television is much needed with good advice for children with humor. A lot of entertainment and information.
Very important insight. And we should not forget that in some countries we still have war, and this since year. So we also had a study, a quantitative and a qualitative part in Syria and Lebanon, led by Yisra. Yisra, can you hear me? Tell us.
Yes, I can. Can you?
Great.
Okay. Hi,
At the
everyone.
Can you tell us, how are
Okay.
Syrian children at the moment?
Like most children of the world, Syrian children in Syria or the refugees in Lebanon no longer go to school or visiting relatives or friends. They stay home all the time or in tent. And this makes them bored, which is the biggest challenge that children face during the quarantine. And it's always more difficult for refugees, children refugees, because the tents are small and having no choices for any fun things. So sorry, can you hear me? I can hear you, or if you talking to me. Okay, I want to speak about the role of the media in providing children with knowledge about the coronavirus. It was very limited. In most Syrian regions, there's no stable electricity or internet connection. Besides that, most of the kids don't have on devices like a computer or mobile phone, so especially refugee children, while the main source of information were parents, and children didn't try to find or search about any information about coronavirus, like they don't care about it actually. It seems Syrian children are most worried about having one of their family's member catch coronavirus, while most of them are not afraid of themselves. So the last point I want to speak about is that many kids are worried about their parents because they lost their jobs, and the children speaking about a lot of things that couldn't bring it. So in general, the refugee in Lebanon are already suffering from poor living and do not have the right to work. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have to keep in mind children's life can be very different in very different worlds. We have to think about the diversity of children, and which brings us to another point. Because what about children who are on the autism spectrum? And we are fortunate enough to have the expert for this question. Meryl Alper, can you hear us in Boston?
I can.
Oh, that's great. Tell us, how do children on the autistic spectrum do at these times? How do they use media at the moment?
Sure. So my research looks at how media and technology in families and children's lives happen kind of in everyday life, particularly for youth on the autism spectrum. And this photo here is of one of my research participants. His name is Oscar. He's a 3-year-old autistic child here in his living room, of course, taken when researchers could still go into other people's living rooms. So what is autism? So broadly, very broadly, it's cognitive, behavioral, and biological in nature. It's usually diagnosed at age 3, but sometimes not until adulthood. And globally, the rates of autism diagnosis are much lower than, say, in the United States or in the UK due to all sorts of forms of structural inequality. So children on the spectrum are both similar and different from their neurotypical, quote unquote, peers. So in terms of similarities, they have gender, racial, ethnic, class, and geographic profiles that can impact their media use just like any other child. In terms of differences, they can have specific challenges with sensory processing, with understanding and expressing language, following expected rules of social interaction, and emotion regulation. So to move on to the next slide, so what might be different about their media use, not just in general, but in the age of COVID-19? So I'll break this down into some key developmental areas, highlighting both challenges that autistic children are encountering, but also strengths that they bring. So socially, some autistic children may actually be more connected than ever to their classmates through, say, video games with chat functions, especially those who might not have been regularly included in after-school play. Other autistic adolescents might find that texts or Snapchat messages simply cannot replace in-person social cue-rich encounters. Emotionally, children on the autism spectrum can be very empathetic, so much so that the news might be emotionally overwhelming right now. Others might express emotions in a more reserved way, but are choosing media content like TV or movies that are helping them process their experiences of disruption, change, and grief. Cognitively, some autistic children have the ability to fully grasp the complexity of COVID-19 through what they see or read online, while those with intellectual impairments might need, short educational YouTube videos that help break things like hand washing or mask wearing down in a simpler manner. Behaviorally, media can provide a sense of routine for autistic children who might especially thrive with clear schedules and plans. At the same time, autistic children might be especially sensitive right now to excessive media use, negatively impacting their ability to self-regulate or to transition to non-media activities. In terms of sleep, autistic children tend to have non-normative sleeping habits, so not having to keep the early schedule of school might be a real relief for them and their parents. But when others, say in the home, are sleeping, media could be what's keeping these kids company at night. And lastly, in terms of creativity, some autistic kids have amazing visual and artistic skills. So large stretches of free time and supportive adults might allow them to work, for example, on a really big Minecraft project. But there are many, especially children who are autistic that also live in all of the countries that have been discussed today, with minimal resources at home, who don't have internet access, limiting the possibilities of their creative potential. So in close, thank you for letting me share these insights, and I hope they provide both clarity and creative inspiration in your work.
Thank you. Thank you, Meryl. Some thoughts about this part?
Yes, so we have Christina Ortner from Austria, whom we've already heard and seen today, and she addresses the producer's responsibility in this context. And she says, producers should provide key information on the coronavirus in a way that is appropriate for children. Yet, they should go beyond health issues, supporting kids to cope with the new challenges of their daily lives and empowering them to take part in the public debate on the crisis.
Our last statement comes from Sandra Cadavid from the Dominican Republic, who offers us a positive outlook. From the results of the study, we realized the high level of concern of children for the situation. We started working on this message through the presenter of the program, Naughty Chicos. We explain that this situation will gradually end. What has happened in the countries of Asia and Europe that are already returning to normal, and that they must be patient and take advantage of these days at home in an entertaining and productive way.
Thank you so much.